Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. Pope Francis visits the United States. Among his stops, an emotional visit to Ground Zero in New York City. That is where the pontiff paused to offer private prayers and took part in a multi-religious gathering entitled A Witness to Peace. He also, for the first time ever, spoke before a joint session of Congress. Take a listen.
Dream continues to inspire us all. And I am happy that America continues to be, for many, a land of dreams.
Applause there for the pontiff. I would like him a whole lot better if he just spoke more quickly, but that's just me. I'm shallow. What can I tell you? Let's say hello to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Alain Sanders, political science professor at St. Peter's University, Jose Lopez, physics professor at Seton Hall University, Albert Goldson, Indo-Brazilian associates, a New York City-based boutique global advisory firm that provides international political and security assessments. And one of the big deals about the Pope's visit, Albert, was all of the security involved. It apparently was the largest security detail of its kind ever carried out in the city of New York.
Well, you have to realize New York is a target-rich city, particularly after 9/11. The last time the Pope visited, of course, that was before all the terrorist activities or threats have occurred. So particularly New York has to be ultra sensitive to a person of high importance coming to New York, particularly the Pope. So for all intents and purposes, law enforcement had to pull out all the stops to make sure to ensure his safety from the time he arrived here till the time he departed.
Alan, I like that the Pope is getting attention. I'm Roman Catholic, it's fine. I rather actually watch something else on television than 24 hours of the Pope every day. Why do you think he got so much coverage? Do you think it was overblown? And do you think we're being a little too Catholic-centric in giving him such gavel-to-gavel coverage of his visit?
Well, you know, the Pope and his coming to the United States and to Cuba and to the various cities is pageantry. And the media always loves pageantry. And so it's naturally going to draw the media. I do think there's media overkill. I think the wonder of the Pope is actually seeing him in public, and for the people who have gone to the various events and the various religious services, I think for them it's a real experience. I think for viewers, however, who are removed, they want to know about the Pope, they want to see what he's doing, but I think the gavel-to-gavel coverage, if I can use that political term, because the Pope did have some political messages to share with us, might be too much for the TV viewers. But for the people who flock to see him, it's a wonderful event. And so the media, you know, gets caught up in the event and doesn't sometimes pull back and say, well, what are the folks at home thinking, you know?
Exactly. I mean, I was pleased to find a television station that was not covering the Pope gavel to gavel, as we said. Jose, are you Catholic?
Yes, I'm Catholic.
Okay, I'm presuming you're Catholic because you're of Latino origin.
Right.
Again, a presumption.
And I work at
Seton Hall University.
And I'm at Seton Hall University, a Catholic university.
Okay, exactly. Why do you think the Pope's getting so much attention? Do you think he's being less well received by Catholics? And because I feel like he's redefining my religion every day, and I'm not quite comfortable with that.
Well, I think on the global stage right now, when you look at all the world leaders, I mean, he transcends it. He transcends politics. His message is a message of being human. I mean, our governments, our technology has have mechanized pretty much everything, and his message is a really, really simple message when you listen to it. I mean, he's basically telling us to be human, to care for each other as we would care for ourselves. I mean, he actually said that. He mentioned the golden rule, which, I mean, I got back in, you know, in Sunday school in second grade.
Right.
You know, he said that to Congress, and I was like, whoa, that's you have to remind adults that they should care about other people, not only themselves, you know, and that seems to be at least a problem in America and throughout the world at the current moment. And, you know, honestly, what he's saying is people are listening. And I've been to Rome twice. One time it was just by coincidence. He had just been elected the Pope, and it was mayhem there. I mean, we had the previous Pope Benedict. He was getting maybe 7,000 people during his weekly audience, and when I got there, it was like 60,000 people showed up there, and it was crowded. I was just there this past summer. Same thing. It hasn't changed in the span of 2 years that he's been the pontiff.
And proof of how popular he is, a lot of goodies were on sale this week. This is a Pope coin secured by our producer, Alyssa Cutler, during a visit to St. Patrick's Cathedral. There were Pope dolls, Pope cookies, people dressed up like the Pope, taking pictures with folks along Fifth Avenue. Let's talk, though, more about the serious side of the Pope. One of the issues he tackled, Albert, was global warming. I almost found this was an odd topic for the pontiff to get into. It seemed rather political. And what's your take on all that?
Well, you're taking basically almost at the highest levels as far as a religious figure is concerned, the Pope, and to bring a message. Climate change is impacting the world, and particularly it impacts very seriously those who are quite poor. In many of the emerging countries, they're already struggling under normal climate conditions. Now you have climate change, which is adversely impacting their livelihood, their ability to feed their families. So again, the developing countries, he's really putting the onus on the developing countries that they have the power to be able to reverse the damages of climate change and to institute policies to make sure that climate change isn't damaging, because it will only cause problems for everyone, not only the emerging countries, but as well as the developing countries. We're all in this together.
Other than climate change or global warming, however you want to phrase it, what were some of the other key issues that the Pope talked about? He talked about redistribution of wealth. He talked about corporations doing their fair share. He talked about people pitching in and working together. What do you think his central message was during this visit?
Well, I think he talked about a lot of issues: immigration, the environment, guns, in fact, and of course the free marketplace and capitalism in general. I think the appeal of the Pope and the reason why people find him so attractive, so enticing, so popular, is because he brings a moral dimension to all of these issues. We tend to debate these issues on statistics. You know, how many people are being laid off, how large is the budget deficit, which department and how much money should we cut from this department. Global warming, you know, is a matter of statistics and so forth. He's basically saying to all of us, and that's why people are so fascinated by him, you know, whatever the issue is, whether it's immigration, whether it's global warming, whether it's guns, whether it's whatever, it actually impacts real people. And there is a moral dimension to that. Real people are getting hurt. So no matter which side of the debate you fall on, you have to be conscious that whatever you decide will have an impact on people. And typically the people who suffer the most because they have the least political power are the underprivileged and the poor. And so he goes out of his way almost at every step that he has taken here on his trip to go out and meet and be a cheerleader, really, and a compassionate cheerleader for the underprivileged, for the poor. And that's his appeal. And we call him the Pope of the people because he insists on that moral dimension.
And because we like alliteration, the People's Pope works nicely.
Well, there's that too.
Exactly. Let's talk about, it's the only literary device I know, so we'll use it a lot, the People's Pope. Let's talk about what he's driving around in, a Fiat. What do you think? That kind of makes him connect with the common man, right?
This is a step up. I mean, when he was in Buenos Aires, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was going around in the subway system there and taking public buses. So, you know, in Rome, he drives a 1984 white Fiat around the Vatican City. So it's kind of a step up. And the modified Jeep that has become the new Popemobile is also, you know, with open windows now, is a new addition to it. I mean, his whole message is really humility, modesty, as Alan's saying. I mean, he's become a voice for the disenfranchised, people that don't have a voice. I mean, I don't see global leaders, whether it's our president or Vladimir Putin, anywhere really talking about the people that are suffering the most. They're you know, migrating out of countries and escaping these problems. But he seems to be the only person really on the global stage who's saying, hey, let's not forget what is happening. Let's not forget about these people.
It's funny because often we have these religious leaders who don't act very religious. They don't act very humble. I remember when I was a field producer in the 80s for CBS, I went to the University Club to interview Father O'Hare, who was the president of Fordham University. I was thrilled that I was going to be interviewing the president of my university. Father O'Hare, nice to meet you. I'm Logan Crawford. And he said to me, "Where is your jacket? You're not allowed in this club without a jacket on." So that was how I lost a little respect for him, and sometimes for the church when people act like that. Talk to me a little bit about the criticism of the Pope. Talk radio, particularly Rush Limbaugh and the other cast of characters out there, are very critical of him. And even though their listeners are evangelical Christians, because he's perceived, in their view, as a leftist.
Well, it's always going to turn political. Whether it's President Obama, President Putin, whoever it might be, again, he's a leader at the highest levels. He doesn't only represent the economical population, Earth population, but as Alan mentioned, it's more of a moral issue globally. Unfortunately, the Pope is a threat to their own particular political programs, and for him to come out and speak out against, for example, climate change and a number of other issues, it makes them it's difficult for them to convince their followership or followers to follow their program. So the Pope really represents a threat, and it's amazing that they actually have that sort of gumption to be so outspoken against a particular leader like the Pope. They can do it to the president or other political leaders, but when it comes to the Pope, that's strictly verboten.
It is usually, but he was saying it, and I don't think you're going to see a dip in their numbers, but only time will tell, although I hate that expression. One of the things he did that in some people's mind was controversial was visiting the island of Cuba. What's your take on that, Alan?
Well, because the Pope is a moral authority and because he is perceived to be relatively neutral, I mean, that's not entirely true, but at least there's a perception of neutrality, he can use his good offices for mediation. And one of the conflicts here in this hemisphere, and he is a product of this hemisphere, he's from Argentina, is the standoff between the United States and Cuba. Many politicians have long believed that the policy of isolating Cuba may have worked, but it's outdated now. And so he is of that perception coming from this hemisphere, and so he used his good offices to do that. Now, that's controversial to some people who want to continue the embargo and the isolation of Cuba, but I suspect there are more people in the United States who believe, okay, we tried that, the regime is now fading, it's not perfect, it has a lot of issues, a lot of problems, but let's face it, there are a lot of countries in Latin America that also have similar problems, so let's not continue to isolate Cuba, but let's see if we can engage in it. And there's no danger in engaging, because if it doesn't work, you can always go back to the old policy.
Exactly. And having this dialogue, Jose, as Alan says, opens up the gates for reform within the country. You flood Cuba with American dollars, I think suddenly they're going to embrace capitalism and democracy. That's my view. What's yours? As
they did before Castro came in, potentially. I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I like what the Pope is saying in general, that there are we seem to isolate the world into two categories. You're a winner, you're a loser. You're a good guy, you're a bad guy. And I think he mentioned this during his address to Congress, mentioned it to his address to the United Nations, that it's not that clear cut, and there's a lot of grayness in all of that stuff. We're all brothers and sisters of each other, and we're in a sense responsible for each other. And by creating borders and embargoes and restrictions, I think we've created a lot of issues that we continue to create a lot of issues. And I think he's pointing that out. Look, there is a responsibility we have towards each other. And I think that's a core message that is out there. And it's not black and white. It's not clear cut, one or the other, A or B.
Yeah, he's always talking about 50 Shades of Grey.
Right.
Exactly. All right, Jose, Alan, Albert, we'll be back with more on other issues after this. For example, who's crying now? The Republican Speaker of the House calls it quits. Was he forced out by the right wing of his party? We'll tackle that question and many, many more after this.